Coming up, a Michigan doctor continues the push for vaccinations, and we meet the winner of the RES 2022 Business Plan Competition, and a few reflections from our week in Las Vegas. I'm Mark Trahant, filling in for Leah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Leah Chavez.
Thank you for joining us. We begin in Utah, where last week Interior Secretary Deb Haaland paid a visit to the southern part of the state. Haaland, along with Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez and Utah Governor Spencer Cox, signed a tribal water settlement. The nation will use $210 million to provide infrastructure and needed clean drinking water to its citizens. President Joe Biden has committed $1.7 billion for 16 tribal water settlements, including this one on the Navajo Nation. The money was appropriated in the recently enacted federal infrastructure bill. Many homes within the Navajo Nation lack running water. Some tribal citizens have to fill containers at public taps or rely on water deliveries from volunteer organizations. During the signing, Secretary Haaland spoke about how these actions will help the Navajo people, saying in part, all of these investments will help provide the Navajo Nation with autonomy and flexibility to design and build appropriate water projects that will address the current and future water needs. Utah will pay the Navajo Nation $8 million as its share of the settlement. The Yurok tribe is celebrating a story of restoration. Earlier this month, the tribal nation partnered with the Redwood National Park to release 2 California condors. It was believed to be the first time the condor has soared these skies in over a century. The bird virtually disappeared in the 1970s because of poaching, plus the now banned pesticide DDT. Much of the condor's habitat has also been destroyed. The Yurok tribe worked with federal and local agencies to return the bird to the tribe's ancestral lands. Chairman Joseph James said the restoration of the condor is a, quote, real-life manifestation of our cultural commitment to restore and protect the planet for future generations. The California condor is the largest native North American bird. It has a wingspan of nearly 10 feet. There are plans to release 2 more condors in an upcoming event. The Field Museum in Chicago opens a new permanent exhibition called Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories. With over 4 years in the making, this interactive exhibit opens the door for Native people and their stories. Melina Hakia reports.
Artist Stormy Weber, who identifies as Sugpiaq, Black, and Choctaw, explores the spirituality of Native people through the stories of her ancestors.
Examining the spiritual continuances and resonance in urban Native people who are taken away from their lands.
Through the Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories exhibit, Weber hopes to share the culture of her Native community, reminding people of the nation's history.
At this moment of racist terrorism in this country, it's important to remind people that the original replacement theory was what the Europeans did to us.
For the first time in its exhibits, the Field Museum doesn't focus only on objects, but is driven by the stories of Native American people, told in their own voices, stories of self-determination, resilience, and continuity.
What's important to us is sovereignty, treaty rights, self-governance, environmental protection, history that's not time-based but place-based.
The new multimedia exhibit, guided by 11 Native American scholars, features more than 105 tribes throughout the U.S. and Canada, with over 400 items on display. Visitors can also experience Native traditions come to life through artist workshops and demonstrations.
We're really celebrating, both traditional activities, but always pulling them forward, reinforcing this notion that Native cultures aren't static, that we're contemporary and, we're dynamic and we're changing, we're evolving.
Miami artist Scott Shoemaker is teaching others how to do ribbon work, weaving in the stories of his indigenous community.
You get to hear what is important about those stories from those communities. There's no single Native stories. There's lots of stories. Even within communities, there's diversity too.
The exhibit teaches visitors about indigenous rights and history and aims to break down stereotypes. In Chicago, Mila Halkia, ICT Newscast.
The American Master Series is showcasing a legendary Hawaiian surfer and swimmer. Duke Kehanemoko is the center of a new episode called Waterman Duke, Ambassador of Aloha. The nearly 2-hour episode tells the story of Kehanemoko, shattering records as a swimmer, even winning 5 Olympic medals. As a surfer, he dominated big waves and influenced surfing on a global scale. The episode also shares the rampant racism Kehanemoko faced as a native Hawaiian. The episode is narrated by Jason Momoa. To watch the episode, you can check your local listings or find it on the PBS video app. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, a Michigan doctor says there's still an urgent need for COVID vaccinations and reflections on the Reservation Economic Development Summit. First, meet a young entrepreneur whose business plan puts culture front and center. Stay with us.
One of the main events at the Reservation Economic Summit is the business plan competition. For high school and college students, the winners get a cash prize towards making their dream come true. The winning team at the college level is from the University of Montana. Representing the team is Chase Comes at Night. He's Blackfeet and he joins us to share his dream for innovative indigenous greens. Welcome, Chase.
Thank you, Shirley, for having me on here.
So tell us about what is the business that you did the plan for.
So the business that we've established is Innovative Indigenous Greens. It's a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to improving the quality of life across Indigenous communities by promoting wellness through a horticultural approach. Now with our organization, we're looking to launch, we've already established 5 initial programs within our organization. And one of those programs, as our poster child, is the Community Aqua Produce Program that works to establish food security across Indian country.
So what do you mean, what do you do to establish food security?
That's a good question. So going along that, the Community Aqua Produce Program works with Indigenous communities to establish local cultivation facilities that house an aeroponic cultivation method in order to provide nutritional support in the form of fresh produce.
So I understand that these are like big greenhouses?
They're more or less facilities
Okay.
due to the fact that we're looking to innovate the way that we do agriculture as well as horticulture across North America. And in order for that to happen, we have to address the disparities across Indian country. And one of those within the majority of our communities is the fact that we reside in food deserts. And with that, it comes to harsh conditions of the weather. And for us to necessarily provide our services effectively, we have to establish facilities that will have the opportunity to weather the climate and everything that goes along with the atmosphere.
I've had the pleasure of visiting your reservation, the Blackfeet Reservation, and it's gorgeous.
And that's why we're doing this, because we would like to keep it that way. North America has a pristine value across the lands, but in order for us to value it, we need to rejuvenate it and revitalize the practices that we are looking to institute, and that's the coexisting in the world.
Now tell me about your partner in the business plan.
So we brought down an individual with the University of Montana, also known as, the individual's name is Stormy Kipp. Stormy Kipp, outside of our organization, is actually an esteemed actor along the way. He's had some acclaimed acting roles within the upcoming Predator as well as one of the most monumental films that I recommend Indian country to get out to see is called Soyi. It's one of the first films in Indian country to have an all specific tribe acting base, as well as an indigenous knowledge as a main knowledge and the main language spoken within the show.
Now, I understand you're a sophomore.
Yes. So I'm just finishing up my sophomore year at the University of Montana. I took a little hiatus during the COVID-19 to really re-solidify my envisionment of this nonprofit organization, because at that point during the pandemic, we were losing a lot of people across our communities, and I wasn't seeing much help across the board. And we've been waiting too long in Indian country for that help. It's our time as the next generation to begin making that advancement towards bettering our communities.
So you have many options in your life, right?
Very much so. I'm an entrepreneur outside of my nonprofit.
Exactly. So as an elder and someone who's got grandkids, why are you doing this? I mean, what is the inspiration that you have in your life to be an entrepreneur?
The true inspiration, if we're being honest here, is I want to do good in this world. In Indian country, we've experienced so much bad, but now there's a time for healing and a time for moving forward. And so my generation, I'm looking to be the catalyst for change in Indian country by showing others that it's obtainable if you set your mind to it. And so that's my inspiration and what guides me to stay on the work that I do in Indian country.
So what are your favorite classes in college?
Actually,
recess?
Yeah, lunch. No, more or less. I'm really deep into philosophy, so my major is political science. So I'm actually out of the realm of business. I was more or less driven toward advocating on behalf of indigenous rights and youth. But as I start transitioning into adulthood, I'll always be a kid, but as I transition into adulthood, it's more or less I'm starting to re-solidify on solutions that can help my community. And business is one of them.
So you have aspirations to run this nonprofit that is going to help with food supply and eliminate food deserts. And how do you see traditional tribal values in that whole concept?
That's a good question, because actually that's one of the things that we really had to reevaluate within our first 2 years, is figuring out where are the crossroads between Western beliefs within agriculture as well as indigenous practices. And one of it is understanding is that there's no trade-off. There is no trade-off. We are at the time in which we have to learn on how to adapt to both worlds. And for that, our nonprofit organization is dedicated to ensuring that indigenous revitalization is the main focus. Thinking about over time, we've had many, federal funding opportunities across Indian country that has been centered around cultural preservation. But as our generation begins to make that catalyst for change, it's time to pivot towards revitalization.
That's great. Chase, I really want to thank you for coming here, and congratulations on winning the business plan competition.
Thank you, Shirley. Wonderful. Thank you. Again, thank you.
A new campaign is aiming to bring culturally appropriate information about COVID-19 vaccines to Indigenous communities. It is called Care for Us by Us. The campaign is led by the Intertribal Council of Michigan. Joining us today is Dr. Frank Animaquam, who is the medical director at the Little Traverse Bay Band Health Clinic. Hi, doctor. Welcome.
Ani Bushu, miigwech for having me.
First, tell us about Care for Us by Us campaign and what it is.
So Care for Us by Us campaign is a campaign that is sponsored by the Intertribal Council of Michigan. And it's a campaign that its goal and mission is to help address the disparity of low vaccination rates and that are currently within our tribe communities, and with a focus here in Michigan. And the goal with addressing the low vaccination rates is to increase them and then limit the spread of the coronavirus.
This is such a confusing time because people think we hear about endemic, we hear about changes going on, and yet there's still a need to do some really basic work in terms of vaccinations and other things.
Right. It is a very challenging time, and there's a lot of challenging terminology that is thrown around out there. So it's important to pay attention to the words that are being used in conversations, and also checking the sources. So they have to be credible sources. So through the tribe clinic here where I work at in northern Michigan, we utilize Indian Health Services as well as the Centers for Disease Control as our primary sources for a lot of updated COVID information. And the other aspect to that is that with a pandemic, you do have different phases. And endemic is just a lowered scale of the pandemic. But what our goal is to try to get to the control part of a pandemic, where you have low cases and you have increased vaccination rates, and you're getting a little bit more control and ahead of the virus.
Some of the vaccination rates for other diseases, such as influenza, have been low in previous years. Is this an opportunity to get people to rethink about vaccines in general?
Yes, vaccines are still the number one means at fighting the coronavirus. And so that means getting someone to be fully vaccinated, so their initial shots, and then also if they're due for their boosters, having them up to date with their booster vaccinations. And if you compare coronavirus to influenza virus, a big reason why influenza virus was lower, there were lower rates of it during the initial years of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And a lot of that has to do with layered prevention efforts. And that's the secondary means of fighting this virus is, when there is high risk situations, when the cases are increasing in an area, there is strain on the healthcare system. That's where mask wearing comes into play, as well as keeping social distance and hand hygiene.
The way that we've changed the way we go about our lives has so dramatically changed from a couple of years ago. And you mentioned mask wearing. The good part of that is there's regular things such as the cold that I don't remember even having a cold. It's been so long. And I know that's uncommon, but it's just the world is different now.
Yeah, certainly it is so. We do have to change and to adapt. And, as challenging as some of these practices may be, there's a reason why we're doing them. There's benefit to getting the vaccine. There's benefit to doing the layered prevention. And the benefit certainly outweighs the risk of catching COVID, the risk of spreading it to someone, or even having severe symptoms and going to the hospital.
What kind of trainings are being provided for healthcare providers and as they go through this vaccine phase?
So there's a multitude of trainings. Indian Health Services will hold periodic briefings with providers throughout the United States working for tribes and urban Indian health centers. There's also CDC trainings that provide regular updates to a lot of the vaccine information, making sure providers are staying up to date on that. Here in Michigan, our state, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, they offer periodic trainings as well to keep providers, so not just physicians, but nurse practitioners, PAs, nurses, keeping everyone up to date as information, we gather more information and there's new advances on vaccines and the COVID therapeutics.
Earlier, you mentioned the idea of getting the language right. And one of the things we hear from both readers and viewers of ICT is that this was an emergency authorization, and as if that discounts the process. How do you confirm to people that it's still okay?
Right. So we look at the information at hand. So even though it's emergency authorization, there's still studies done before any of these vaccines go to distribution and go to administering. And within those studies, they're able to test to see, okay, how effective is the vaccine, but then also how safe is it? So even though there's emergency use authorization, the benefit and the safety of the vaccine certainly outweighs the risk of getting COVID. And any of the adverse events that you hear about in the news headlines, they're very rare, on the scale of 1% or less.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Annie McQuinn.
Yes, thank you. Miigwech.
Indian Country Today editor Jordan Bennett Begay joins us today to give us her reflections on our week at RES 2022. Welcome, Jordan.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
The RES conference is sponsored by the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. Tell us about the week and how many people were there and what it was like.
Oh, wow. Now I know why RES is the big talk in Indian Country, because I think even after 3 years of the pandemic, and this was the second year of the conference being in person, and people were really excited to be there and see each other and just, talk about what's going on, how they've lived through the pandemic, but also just a lot of networking. And I mean, there was about hundreds, maybe even thousands of people there in Las Vegas, Nevada. And you had panels on everything and anything, on agriculture, on solar energy, in the entertainment industry. Is at least that's my that was exciting for me, because the entertainment industry and fashion industries are booming. So there's tons of panels on those there. But it was a really exciting week. I mean, it was fun just to meet new people as well, and just to bring ICT, and tell them like, hey, we're here and we're here to connect with you and hear your stories.
I was struck by the high number of pretty high-ranking government officials that took part of the conference.
Oh, no, definitely. That did take me by surprise. I mean, you had, I think, a lot of officials from every department. You have like commerce or agriculture, the Small Business Administration, and even the White House. And, I think it also, a lot of the years, have been leading up to it and trying to, in a sense, bridge that gap between, the federal agencies and tribal nations and tribal leaders. So I'm thinking, this is like where the place to bridge that gap was, to bring them face to face and to hear them, hear the federal officials, and for tribal officials to maybe bring their concerns to them as well.
In some ways, it was almost like there were three separate conferences going on. There was the actual content conference, which was people speaking and panels and speeches and that sort of thing. Then a really massive trade show, and then a really massive art show.
No, there was. And I think that was really fun to see kind of it siloed into these three. But they were so big. There's so many artists there on outside the trade show floor and on the trade show. I mean, like you said, the trade show was its own thing, and it was pretty. There's a lot of people, going around, and it was just amazing to see, even on the trade show floor, the amount of new businesses are happening. I mean, I think you covered that one business who is creating non-alcoholic beer and wine, and it's really cool to see those type of businesses be like very innovative and turn something, like I said, negative into positive for Indigenous communities.
One of the interesting balances that you see at RES is the difference between tribal enterprises and individual entrepreneurs, and both with events for young people doing business plans, you're seeing more and more of the individual entrepreneurs kind of rise up.
Oh, no, definitely. And I think that's a lot of what the 40 under 40 recognition was. And also just on the trade show floor, and just hearing, like I said, the youth business plan competition, and, it was just really inspiring to hear from them and see them and hear all their ideas and how they want to make their communities a better place, and also looking for ways to collaborate among all these, because you have tons of ideas and there's probably like a few, similar pages, but when they probably collaborate or find each other there at the conference, they're able to do something bigger than their both ideas.
Tell us more about the 40 under 40.
40 under 40, I mean, we had each one on the show last week. These are 40, young folks under the age of 40 who are just doing big things, who are forward thinkers, thought leaders in their communities, and just really doing incredible things. I mean, you had NCAI's Kelby Kennedy, and she has been one of the leaders of the Violence Against Women Act. And so that's her expertise. So she was recognized for that. And you had some other folks, who were just doing incredible work the past few years and being recognized for it.
It's just showing just the sheer volume of this. How do you tell it as a story when you're planning the reporting and to getting people to different places?
Well, a lot of it is you can plan as much as you can, and but sometimes you're going to just have to go with the flow because there are stories that just popped out of nowhere that we thought that's going to be a story. That's going to be a story. I mean, for example, I went into it with one story that I thought was a story, but then day one, I was like, nope, I'm going to do a profile on, the son of famous Dave's founder, because nobody has done it yet. So I think it's also leaving room for those unexpected profiles. And I mean, that's the fun part about it.
Well, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I want to hear about Bethany Yellowtail.
That was a fun interview. Well, I think that was a really fun interview. I think the fashion industry is just something that I'm very curious about, and not just the showiness of it, but also just the business savviness you have to even break into this industry. So that's what a lot of we talked about.
Thank you, Jordan Bennett Begay.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I'm Mark Trahant, filling in for Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.